Talking about Afghanistan. What exactly is unfolding there? Apart from the humanitarian situation, there is no announcement of a government yet. When could such an announcement take place? What is really happening on the ground? We'll also talk about how did things come to such a pass? How did the Afghan government just wither away overnight? Why did the Afghan security forces put up almost no or zero resistance and literally hand over the country to the Taliban? What does the Taliban think? Is it a changed Taliban? This and much more over the next 1 hour. Let's begin with the headlines we're tracking at the start. Taliban declare amnesty across Afghanistan and urge women to join their government. Women across the spectrum remain skeptical of the invite, voice fear of return of literal dark ages for them, as many believe that the Taliban regime will return to older ways of brutal suppression of basic human rights. UN agencies and International Red Cross voice relief that devastating urban warfare was avoided in Kabul, but warned that humanitarian needs are likely to increase in the coming days. The UN Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights fears that thousands of Afghan rights workers might be at risk. Voice concern about safety of workers promoting human rights. World nations start evacuating their citizens from Afghanistan as Taliban tightens the grip on the nation. India evacuates its ambassador in Kabul and Indian embassy staff. Indian ambassador to Afghanistan assures that Indian citizens stuck were sheltered at the embassy and their safety was ensured. Taliban and its allies celebrate takeover of Kabul as a blame game starts in the US on the fiasco. US President Joe Biden faces stark criticism on his decision to withdraw. Republican Senator, minority leader, terms the events unfolding in Afghanistan as a defeat for America. And US President Joe Biden rejects broad criticism of the chaotic withdrawal, stands squarely behind his decision to withdraw US troops from Afghanistan, blames the Taliban's takeover on Afghan political leaders who fled the country and the unwillingness of the Afghan army to fight the militant group. A day after UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres urges concern and urges action to ensure Afghanistan does not become terror-safe haven, Western nations voice a growing worry that the Islamist militants will seek to benefit from the turmoil in Afghanistan. So those were the headlines we were tracking at this hour, and let's begin with the big news of the hour. Well, as Taliban returned to power in Kabul, the world nations have expressed anxiety over the turn of events in the coming weeks and months. Although the Taliban have declared an amnesty across Afghanistan and urged women to join their government, their claims appear hollow given the reality of the past. Women fear that they stand to lose hard-won gains as Taliban complete their dramatic sweep through Afghanistan.
The biggest question begging an answer after the Taliban's return to Kabul is about the human rights of the vulnerable, minorities and most importantly the women and girls. They stand to lose hard-won gains as the Taliban complete their dramatic sweep through Afghanistan. Amid all the chaos in the Central Asian nation, the biggest concern is about the fate of women and what are the hardline Islamists' plan for them. Though the Taliban has claimed that women would be able to participate in public life, however, their claim betrays the stark reality of the past. Afghan leader Farzana Kochai says she fears for her life first and her freedom to work and speak up.
I'm afraid of myself, my life, and my freedom to work and my freedom to speak up. These are the things that I'm afraid of losing them, because all of them are for me, like for you, for everyone. If you can't work, you can't talk, you can't go out. So that won't be a good life that you're having, and you can't define it as a life totally.
Kochai fears the worst for women in Afghanistan, sparked by the memories of the bitter past. Kochai concerns are shared by Aisha Wahab, first Afghan-American woman elected to the public office in the United States.
I think it's heartbreaking in a lot of different ways. I think it's also very disappointing to see the withdrawal, execution of the withdrawal, and the fear of the unknown. What is going to happen to women and children, religious and ethnic minorities, when the hashtags and the trending die down?
Nobel Peace Prize winner Malala Yousafzai also raised a concern for the safety of women in Afghanistan, recalling the horrors of earlier Taliban regime against the women.
I am deeply concerned about the situation in Afghanistan right now, especially about the safety of women and girls there. I had the opportunity to talk to a few activists in Afghanistan, including women's rights activists, and they are sharing their concern that they are not sure what their life is going to be like. A lot of them remember what was happening in the 1996 till 2001 time, and they're deeply worried about their safety, their right, their protection. They're worried about their access to school. And we have already seen news reports that many girls have been sent back from university. A lot of them have been asked to get married, at age 15, 12.
Senators in United States also feel the same way.
I fear also for the Afghan women and girls who in all likelihood are going to be put back into a totally untenable position by these barbarians.
At the United Nations Security Council meeting on Afghanistan, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres lamented that there were already accounts mounting human rights violations against women and girls. The world leaders and also the women in Afghanistan are praying that the Taliban makes good its promise on women's rights when they hold the reins completely. Coming days would tell whether the promises are kept or once again the nation is thrown to the horrors witnessed in earlier Taliban regime. Bureau Report, DD India.
She fears the worst for women in Afghanistan, sparked by the memories of the bitter past. Kochai's concerns are shared by Aisha Wahab, the first American woman elected to public office in the United States. And a day after the Taliban seized power in Afghanistan, a prominent local news station had a female anchor interviewing the Taliban official live on air on Tuesday, signaling a push by the Taliban to project a more moderate image to the international community. In the near 17-minute interview, Tolo News presenter Behishta Arghand spoke to Taliban spokesperson Mawlavi Abdullah Haq Ahmad in a TV studio. The scenario would have been unimaginable between 1996 and 2001, when the Taliban ruled Afghanistan and followed strict Islamic law for forbidding women from working. Girls were also not allowed to attend school, and women had to cover their faces and be accompanied by a male relative if they wanted to venture out of their homes. Unicef cited some local Taliban representatives as saying that they were waiting for guidance from the leaders on the issue of educating girls, while they've said they want schools up and running. So that's an interesting development. This visual is going to be, is in that sense really a revolutionary visual. We don't know the just optics or has the leopard really changed its spots, but it's indeed a revolutionary visual which in your general memory or imagination you do not associate with Taliban. Is Taliban signaling for better things to come? Is the Taliban become more progressive, or is it just the optics, a tactical shift for the moment to see to seek international recognition and present a changed face, while the core remains the same? That remains to be seen. Well, let's talk about the situation on the ground. Large crowds of people desperate to flee Afghanistan continued their wait at the Kabul airport as military flights are evacuating diplomats and civilians. These flights resumed early on Tuesday, days after the Taliban seized the capital. Videos emanating from the Hamid Karzai Karzai International Airport showed what looked to be mostly civilians stranded at the entrance of Hamid Karzai International Airport and many others, some young children waiting within the airport premises as aircraft flew overhead. One footage also showed an aircraft taking off as people watched while standing on a runway. The number of civilians at the airport had thinned out to a day after chaotic scenes in which U.S. troops had to fire and disperse crowds, and people clung on to U.S. military transport plane as it taxied for a takeoff. U.S. forces took charge of the airport, their only way to fly out of the country on Sunday, as the militants were winding up a dramatic week of advances across the country with their takeover of the capital without a fight. And spokesperson for the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Rupert Colville, expressed concern about the safety of Afghans, especially those working to promote rights across the country.
The rights of all Afghans must be defended. We're particularly concerned about the safety of the thousands of Afghans who have been working to promote human rights across the country and who have helped improve the lives of millions.
And UNICEF's Chief of Field Operations and Emergency, Mustafa bin Masood, said that the Taliban have not changed their stand on most issues. Masood added that the Taliban have, however, shown interest in girls' education and schools.
The stand of the Taliban is more or less the same, but we've seen small differences, especially in terms of girls' education. There are part of the country where they told us that they're waiting for guidance from their leadership, religious and political. And in other places, they actually said that they wanna see girls' education and school up and running.
And Masood also said that they had meetings with the newly appointed NGO Commission for the Taliban at two of their regional offices. He added that discussions are going on with Taliban and the UNICEF is optimistic about favorable outcomes.
And this morning, in actually two of our zonal offices, we were in meetings with newly appointed NGO Commissioner for the Taliban. We've had discussion with them, ongoing discussion, and we are quite optimistic based on those discussions, but remain to be seen. We have not a single issue with the Taliban in those field offices.
A prisoner named Waliullah crossed into Pakistan on Tuesday after his release from Afghan prison. Waliullah said that he had spent 2 years in the Bagram prison before the Taliban broke into the facility and released prisoners. The Taliban have reportedly freed prisoners as it took control in Afghanistan, and Pakistani Taliban, or Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, said in a statement around 780 prisoners, including some of its important leaders, were being released. And ICRC Director General Robert Martini voiced relief that the devastating urban warfare was avoided in Kabul when the Taliban fighters advanced into the city, but warned that humanitarian needs are likely to increase. More than 40,000 people wounded during the fighting in Afghanistan have been treated since June at the health facilities supported by the International Committee of Red Cross, including 7,600 so far this month, the aid agency said on Tuesday.
The fact that fighting has stopped is positive news for civilians. It's a good respite, but the humanitarian needs are likely to be there and to increase. So the ICRC is present in Afghanistan and is committed and determined to stand by the Afghan communities and help them in the various fields.
And Madini added in a statement that ICRC medical teams and physical rehabilitation centers expect to receive patients for months and years to come as they recover from wounds from explosive devices that litter the country, many of them newly laid in recent weeks. He added that the ICRC was in constant dialogue with the Taliban leadership and local representatives to be able to continue their humanitarian work in hospitals and in evacuating wounded people.
Well, the consequences of fighting on civilian population the wounded people, those amputees who needs to be fitted. These takes years, if not decades, of support. Our physical rehabilitation programs in Afghanistan is a testimony to this, where we're still supporting many of the wounded of past conflicts. So this is a huge challenge going forward, and we are committed to helping those people who have been injured in the recent fighting.
And amid the escalating humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, India is doing everything possible to facilitate and evacuate its citizens. In a recent effort, India has evacuated its ambassador in Kabul and Indian staff in a special Air Force flight this morning. After negotiations for over 24 hours, India has managed to evacuate the second batch of diplomats, officials and journalists from Kabul using an Indian Air Force C-17 plane. The Indian Air Force aircraft has arrived with all the evacuees at Jamnagar. Over 140 Indians from Kabul, including the last of the Indian embassy staff, the Indo-Tibetan border police personnel and 4 media persons arrived in India. The flight was one of the 2 military aircraft that operated by the Indian Air Force for the purpose of bringing home all Indian personnel from the embassy. India is now waiting for US forces to allow civilian flights to Kabul for further evacuation. The first batch of Indians came on Sunday via Air India flight. Also, the Ministry of Home Affairs has reviewed visa provisions in view of the current situation in Afghanistan. The ministry in a tweet said, and I quote, a new category of electronic visa called the E-Emergency X-Miscellaneous or X-MISC visa introduced to fast-track visa applications for entry into India, unquote. And the Indian ambassador to Afghanistan, Rudendra Tandon, returned safely to India along with several members of his diplomatic staff, the embassy officials and Indian citizens. The Indian ambassador to Afghanistan addressed the media on returning to India. He said that the Indian citizens stuck in a war-torn nation were sheltered at the embassy where their safety was ensured and citizens were brought back in 2 phases.
Citizens who found themselves in distress because of the fast changing situation. So our policy was that anyone who reached the embassy was taken into the embassy. Well, I don't know how they managed inside the embassy, but we were sure that they were safe, secure, and there was an avenue for an exit. That was the general approach we followed. And we did this in 2 phases. We did this, and this would not have been possible without the work of the whole embassy. Different wings did different jobs. Some of the jobs I can't even mention, but it all came together and we are finally here, safe and secure in front of you.
So the ambassador very happy. You can see the relief on his face. He negotiated with the local militia in part. In fact, the convoy, I'm told, was stopped. It was not allowed to go to the airport by the Taliban. They had to return to the embassy, but then negotiations happened. The ambassador was personally leading these negotiations, and finally the Taliban agreed to let the Indians out yesterday. In fact, an Air India flight had to go, but it had to be cancelled because of the chaotic situation there. But finally the diplomatic staff, ITBP personnel, some journalists who were reporting there, some civilians are back. Now the task remains of letting in any Hindus or Sikhs who are primarily Afghans, not Indians, who might want to come to India, and their visas can be processed faster, as the Ministry of Home Affairs has put out that saying that they have tinkered the provisions of granting visa under a special e-visa arrangement. Really, where does that leave Afghanistan? Where is Afghanistan going? How did things come to such a pass? We'll talk about that. I have with me Manjeev Singh Puri, a former diplomat. So many thanks for joining us. Let me begin by asking you the question that everyone is asking today, that how did things come to such a pass? You did you personally imagine that, you know, things will fall like nine pins, it'll happen so fast, and the situation will evolve the way it is evolved today?
Amirpal, thank you very much. Of course, this is a question which rests in my mind too. And none of us perhaps anticipated this because we didn't want to anticipate it. But you know, we must understand what finally happened. For 20 years, the Western Alliance, led by the United States, propped up an Afghanistan superstructure, including with the president and so on and so forth. They were exactly that. They crumbled like the proverbial cookie. Let's look at something else. Once the Americans had started talking to the Taliban in earnest in Doha, the legitimacy, their takeover was now only a matter of time and days. They set a deadline for the 31st of August. It happened earlier. Some people say it's all scripted. I don't believe that. But certainly an element of the fact that it was scripted means it would have happened in any case, would have happened. President Biden himself went on record to say that what was the point of staying on, how much longer could the delay have happened? Well, and we can all sit here and talk in terms of more orderly withdrawal. I don't know what an orderly withdrawal actually means. The last times that we have seen an orderly withdrawal or a withdrawal in 1975, Saigon was also like this. I'm afraid this is the nature of the problems. It's really the Afghan people's problems. And I personally, of course, feel for them very much. Lots of friends. I am very glad to see that the Indian ambassador, his staff, and as many Indians as possible could have been evacuated. These are wonderful people who stayed out till the very end. But where Afghanistan goes from now, I think some of your photographs or your pictures were particularly illuminating. Is it just a facade? Women interviewing leaders, calls that please go back to your school, waiting for some guidance? We don't know. We want to see. I sincerely hope that 20 years out of power has also given the Taliban a feeling that if you want legitimacy, you may have, but to remain in power, you also need to demonstrate that there are some very basic elements that you do respect and that you will also take forward. Let's see.
No, so what are you arguing, Ambassador Puri? Are you arguing that the leopard has changed its spots, or are you saying it's a tactical move just to seek international recognition and sound more liberal and modern in their approach while the core remains essentially primitive?
Amirpal, it's difficult for me whether the leopard has changed its spots or it's in disguise. It's difficult, I think, for anyone to say. I heard the UN Unicef representative use the word optimistic. Everybody needs to remain in that state of play, even though the history is not a very optimistic one. The history is one of obscurantism. It is a history in which these people have not demonstrated anything good. But have they learned anything from the last 20 years? There is very little we can do, because we have to see not only their words, we have to see action, and it has to be demonstrated, I would say over a very long period of time, but at least during a certain period of time, to be able to have some kind of a glimmer that I won't say that they have changed, but at least that they've decided to maybe cover their spots a little bit.
Okay, yeah, you're right. I mean, their history or their past doesn't inspire much confidence, but yes, I mean, their brutality, at least in these past 3-4 days, or the public display of it, is not what we saw in '96 when they took over. We hope it continues this way and gets better. But Ambassador Puri, let's talk about what is happening on the ground. It is a precarious situation. It is a country without a government. The Americans are running, imagine, their capital's airport. Their people are not reporting to work, understandably so, because nobody knows who is in command. The Taliban are moving around here and there, but they are not the government. Those who work for the government, say those who work for their foreign ministry, those who work for their home ministry, or those who work in their schools, don't know what the policy is. As a woman, a teacher, am I supposed to go to the school? Am I not? Will I be killed? Am I supposed to even teach what was being taught, or is the syllabus going to completely change? So it's in a limbo. So how long do you see this would drag on, and how long would this chaos go on? Because for people on the ground, this is proving to be a humanitarian catastrophe.
So Amritpal, till now, let me put it like this. We have seen apprehension, we have seen fear, and that's understandable. After all, think about it. For 20 years, people grew and got nurtured in a certain kind of system. And now what you are seeing is a return to a system from which, in a sense, you felt liberated. So there has to be apprehension, there is no doubt about it. But the fact is that the Afghan government sort of crumbled, they just vanished. And since they vanished, I'm not sure the Taliban was already waiting in the tents with their ministers and others to come over. They haven't. They, in fact, as people say, they drove in motorcycles and found themselves entering the presidential palace. Well, there has been a collapse. Maybe we can say one thing, that thank God there hasn't been violence. Most regime changes have been accompanied by massive violence and killing. That hasn't happened here. Is this a plus point or not? I don't know. It of course means a great deal of instability in the minds of people. But people had lived also under a kind of instability now for a fairly long time. How long will this last? I again can't give you any definitive answer. But I believe that relatively sooner rather than later, elements of government would start falling into place. After all, you heard the Unicef representative say that some NGO commissioners have been appointed. Some other people will be appointed. Newspapers are talking about somebody being looked at as a possible president of Afghanistan. I think this kind of semblance will happen. Now, will it give confidence to people to return to their previous jobs? My understanding is that they will have very little options and they will take their chances. Because, you know, the society that got built in the last 20 years, it was not a revolutionary society. It was a society which started enjoying a little bit of the comforts of modernism and so on. And in this kind of a society, you take your chances. You really do take your chances because, frankly, you are not in the mood of either revolutionary kind of action or simply, you know, standing there with your chest bared, etc. You don't. People will try to take their chances. Let's hope that the leopard isn't just disguising its spots, but actually perhaps some of them may have changed.
Okay. All right. Ambassador Puri, request you to stay on. I'm also joined by Vivek Karchu, former diplomat, and also I'm joined by my producer will, because I can't see my producer, if you could tell me, we have another guest joining us. Rajeshwari Krishnamurthy, she's from the IPCS UK. Thank you, Rajeshwari and Ambassador Karchu, for joining in. Ambassador Manjeev Puri is already there. Ambassador Karchu, let me come to you. I was asking Ambassador Puri about what is, how long will this chaos prevail? How long before, you know, we see a government in place in Kabul? What is your assessment?
I think that in addition to the very valid points that Manjeev has made about the swiftness with which all this happened and the Taliban perhaps were not ready, the Taliban leadership, I think there is another aspect to this, and that's twofold. The first is that they had this shadow governors and a shadow administration in the provinces. And the news reports are indicating that that administration at the provincial level in some manner or form is taken over in order to ensure quote unquote law and order or public order. In Kabul, I saw on some media reports that the governor is a man called Mullah Shireen, and that too is indicative of a shadowy system now coming out in the open to take control of things at the local. I think at the central level, the sophistication to my mind is that they haven't rushed in. They haven't suddenly come in to take over government. But that at the moment, I believe, some negotiations are going on in Doha about the formation of the government. I have no doubt that there are some red lines as far as the Taliban are concerned on their flag, on the name of the country. It won't be the Islamic Republic, they'll insist that it is the Islamic Emirate. But there can be the inclusion, one can't rule out that there can be the inclusion of some technocrats, some old figures, etc., to show some signs of inclusion. So, to my mind, the fact that it was not as if the Taliban entered and on Sunday evening there were sudden flights and people took over, that has not happened, and that's in sharp contrast to what happened in 1996 when they entered Kabul. They entered Kabul and they let loose a reign of terror. Among the first things they did, their beliefs, and I believe with some validity, that they were prompted by outside power to do that. They hung the former president and his brother.
Right.
This time around, they are telling people, the leaders, that look, we'll protect you. Don't go out. And it is significant that for the time being, Dr. Abdullah, the former president, Dr. Karzai, Gulbuddin Hikmatyar are there. And since Ghani has, the only term I can use is runaway, bolted, these three senior Afghan leaders are now trying to work out some arrangement with the Taliban for a handing over, an orderly handing over. And I'm confident Manjeet will agree with me that this shows a degree, even if they are being advised by the Chinese and the Russians and the Pakistanis, but it shows a degree of sophistication in the way that they are handling things. Now, there are question marks in many minds that is this for real? That the kind of deportment they are showing on the streets of Kabul and on gender affairs, for example, is this going to last? That no one can answer, only time will tell.
Okay.
But certainly in the last 48 hours, my last point, certainly in the last 48 hours, they have not shown any of the crudity or the lack of experience of international affairs or how to conduct themselves internationally as they did in the 1990s.
Okay. Rajeshwari Krishnamurthy, let me bring you in. Ambassador Karju and also earlier Ambassador Puri are saying that, the Taliban is not showing the brutality or the public display of it yet. They haven't rushed in to take power. They're waiting for this. Ambassador Puri believes that this is because they themselves weren't ready with the Council of Ministers. Perhaps in their assessment they didn't think it will come so soon, it will come so easy. Ambassador Karju argues that they're trying to put a sheen to it. They will try and make it look like inclusive and representative. These are the two words being bandied about by including some technocrats from the former administration. What is your assessment of the situation? Why is the Taliban, say for example, is it a different Taliban from the 1996 Taliban, or is it a smarter Taliban which is not executing Ghani, unlike Najib, not showing brutality on the streets of Kabul and other cities? Is it a different Taliban, or is it just a tactical move to get international recognition and present a different face than they what actually are?
Thank you for having me with you guys today. Let me start with a small correction. I am with the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, IPCS, but it's a Delhi-based organization.
Oh, okay.
I'm in the UK right now.
Oh,
so small clarification, that is it. I would like to sort of clarify already that I do not think that the Taliban have really changed. If you notice, if you have sort of tracked how their statements were and compared it to their actions, if we even only trace it from July 2018, which is when the US started talks with the Taliban, their rhetoric has remained effectively the same. What they've done is they've softened their language. That's what they've done. They've never given clear specifics. If someone asks them, what about women's rights? They effectively said, yes, of course, there will be women's rights, but according to Islamic principles. When they were asked, what do you mean by Islamic principles? Whose interpretations of those principles would you follow? They never gave a clear answer. They just let it be. But that's just one indication of how they were. They also they hard bargained during the negotiations. The US's negotiations was never about a political settlement. It was more about an exit solution rather than a political settlement. If you look at it from, zoomed out a little bit. Another thing that I would sort of like to point out is that, I agree with Master Kaju when he says, he's right when he says they will probably include some existing political personalities to display a certain degree of inclusivity. And they've already begun to do that. They've sort of asked the Kabul mayor to continue in his role and so on and so forth. So that's already there. But I feel it's more a show of continuity than inclusivity. How long this will last depends on how many diplomatic staff will be left in the country and when they'll all leave, I feel. Also, another thing that I feel that needs to be sort of remembered, one of the things that they also did, for example, was that today, or like a few hours ago, the Taliban gave an interview to a female news anchor today. She was wearing a regular headscarf, not the type that the Taliban seek. Women also protested the Taliban takeover in front of a bunch of Taliban in Kabul, and there were no reprisals. None of these could have been imaginable in the 1990s when they ruled. But the thing is, we should not just look at what is happening in the capital city, where the world's media is present right now. What we also need to see is what the Taliban are doing in the rural areas and other provinces. When you look for that, there is very little reporting on that. What does that tell you then? In fact, the information coming out of the provinces and rural areas ultimately are videos, photos, or verbal accounts of people who are under Taliban rule. And the situation visible is unlike what is happening in Kabul. One of the videos shows very clearly a Taliban fighter seizing away a girl child, probably about 11, 12 years old, as spoils of war. Then recently, the Taliban had also ordered that all unmarried girls
above 15 and yes.
They would all be married off to Taliban fighters. One Afghan organization had been conducting monthly surveys with women from 16 provinces in the country since September last year, 2020. Over these women who are living under Taliban-controlled territories in 16 provinces. In the July 2020, so they were doing monthly surveys. In the July 2021 survey, 69% of the 3,480 women living under Taliban-controlled areas in 16 provinces confirmed that the Taliban were enforcing forced marriages, compulsory burqa, the Mehram rule, which is you need a male chaperone, and banned them from work.
So you're saying what is playing out on the streets, Rajeshwari, you're arguing what's playing out on the streets of Kabul is for the optics of the cameras of the international media there and trying to present...
The provinces are very different. Another video came up, a Western journalist was interviewing the Taliban. She asked them if women will have rights. They said, yeah, of course, under Islamic principles, fine. Then she asked, would there be democracy where there'd be voting? And women would be allowed to, partake in, elections. They started laughing. That video is there. Like they started laughing and they asked the camera to be turned off. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that words do need to match actions, and what the leadership is saying, that's not what the ground level folks may be doing.
Okay, I can see both Ambassador Puri and Ambassador Karju wants to come in. Ambassador Puri, if you permit, can I allow Ambassador Karju first to come in? Ambassador Karju, please.
No, I don't want to.
No, please make your point, and then Ambassador Puri.
I share the skepticism of my co-panelists. Certainly, we've got to see how in the coming week, month, how the Taliban conduct themselves. But the question is, these videos represented who among the Taliban? Who were being who were being videographed for comment? Is there clarity there? Was it the Taliban provincial leadership? Was it the Taliban foot soldiers? Now, second, as far as these surveys are concerned, my question is, where were these surveys conducted? Were they in the cities? Were they in the Pashtun heartland? Were they among the Hazaras, the Uzbeks, the Tajiks? And if the Tajiks, were they Tajiks from Herat or from Badakhshan? or from Panjshir. I have a little awareness of Afghanistan, Rajeshwari ji, and therefore I am aware that in many places it is socially a very, very, very conservative country. The kind of evolution that has taken place in the last 20 years in the larger cities is not what has taken place among in the Pashtun heartland, for example. The kind of social mores or norms on gender in Hazarajat is quite different from what it is in Panjshir, absolutely different from Kabul, and quite different from Uzbeks. Now, I'm not apologetic, I'm not apologetic or I'm no advocate of the Taliban. Far from it. I think we'll have to see in some of their practices in the 1990s were simply abominable. But I am, because of my little experience, which is not very long, but only of 25 years of dealing with Afghanistan, has taught me that just as in India, we have a complete spectrum of values and behavior on social issues, on gender issues, for example, so it is in Afghanistan. So when I see these video clips, I, for one, don't form snap judgment. Again, I would emphasize, we have to, I would emphasize, I need to have more evidence. I'm not saying that what the Taliban are doing, we should take at face value.
Ambassador Karju,
we need to have some more evidence.
Yes, no, I agree with you, Ambassador Karju, but what Rajeshwari is saying is this represents what they stand for. For example, on will you allow women to vote? Now, even if the person...
May I ask you this?
Yes.
So could I come in a little bit?
Please.
My statement that Ambassador Karju has come in.
Rajeshwari, one second, Rajeshwari, I'll allow you to speak. I think Ambassador Karju wants to clarify here. Please, Ambassador Karju.
In India, would we take the values and the articulation of absolutely out fringe elements as the values of our principal groups? No.
So you're saying that these interviews...
I do not know. All that I'm asking is, who are they from? Who is talking? I don't know. So I'm not in a position to make a judgment if the Taliban have evolved or not. I can't do it. Therefore, it well may be true and time will show. I'm skeptical. Time will show, but I cannot, as of today, make a judgment. That's all that I'm saying.
Okay, all right. Rajeshwari, I think Ambassador Karju clarifies himself. He's saying that, it depends upon who's talking, one, and secondly, you need to factor in, the cultures that they come from and things like that. But he's saying the larger point taken that he does not defend them or their ideology, and he believes that he still is skeptical about what they really are and who's speaking, and he's got a fair point there. I'll let Ambassador Puri come in. Ambassador Puri, you wanted to make a point, please.
I would really like to come in over here.
Please go ahead.
Raised some very valid questions. I'd like to give him some answers that I'm able to give, and he can then judge.
Please.
His, very extensive experience. So the provinces where these surveys were conducted were Herat, Kandahar, Helmand, Nangarhar, Bamiyan, Balkh, Takhar, Panjshir, Daikundi, Jawzjan, Farah, Faryab, Badghis, Baglan, Paktia, and Kunar. These are the provinces where the surveys took place. These are not just Kabul or Panjshir. There are various provinces. All of these provinces.
Could you please? This is a very significant point. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little old. Can you please repeat the provinces and also indicate how extensive were these surveys and who conducted them?
Okay.
The surveys were
No,
conducted
because
on a
they're
monthly
very
basis. So the
Maybe-
surveys were conducted on a
and-
monthly basis
Yes.
from September 2020 with daily phone calls and form fillings with around 3,480 women, but spread across these provinces.
Okay.
It is a small
provinces were?
fraction of the number of women that are there, but it
There
does
are-
tell you something.
No, but Ambassador, what are we arguing about here? Rajeshwari is simply making a point that, that there are different voices emanating. It's difficult to make a judgment. This is the same point you saying, that it's difficult to what they stand for. Right now what they're doing, why they're doing, do they really mean it? And the Taliban sitting in the presidential palace could be very different from the Taliban sitting in a provincial capital. But there is also another point, that when the Commissioner of Police says that we are a very friendly police, you have to judge him by how his constable operates on the streets and deals with the people, because he's the guy dealing with the people on the ground and not the Commissioner of Police. So things
able to control.
yeah, so we agree to the points that we are making, both. Rajeshwari, Ambassador Puri, you wanted to come in, please.
Amritpal, we started off by talking about the leopard. So, I think we decided that this is not just a case of trust and verify, but it's certainly a case of you're saying it, demonstrate. And demonstrate in serious manner. It's not just the constable, but, demonstrate it properly. I think, I'm of course very honored to have Ambassador Vivek Karchuk here. He's India's first ambassador after the changeover, and I believe in our system, one of the most experienced persons knowing and dealing with Afghanistan. So, sir, I'm very happy. Rajeshwari, good to see you, and good to hear what you said. But, sir, let me make a point. Much of the subject matter of our discussions here is not about rural Afghanistan and if different places. I don't think in the last 20 years, this superstructure that was put up did much in those parts of Afghanistan. And so you are seeing what you are seeing. What has happened, of course, is in the major cities, particularly Kabul, Herat, Kandahar, etc., there was this particular change. Is the Taliban going to show a sort of different spot, a different way of going about it? I think we just have to wait. Are their handlers, and I'm using this term quite loosely, Pakistan, further influence China, Russia, the United States, let's also understand that they are also in the tent with them in Doha and elsewhere. Will they be able to tell them that, if the game is power? Let me put it to you like this. When they came to power in 1996, maybe power was one of the points of understanding, but theology, these kind of fundamentalism were very much in the fore. I suppose after 20 years, one thing they've figured out, that these are all platforms and power is what you want. And I hope they've also figured out that if you want to remain in power in a fairly big country, Afghanistan is not a very small country. If you want to remain in power in a place where the world is looking at you, then you have to do certain minimum things so that your legitimacy at least continues to remain. We know that there's a country far away, the eastern part of Asia, which does all kinds of things, but nobody questions its exact legitimacy. This is the basic point. So the Taliban, the onus is on them. Spots or no spots, change or no change, I don't know. The onus is on them. Have they figured it out? Have they learned a lesson of the last 20 years? After all, they took quite a beating. It's not that they did. If they figured it out, will they be able to manage it? Will their handlers have the necessary influence to be able to tell them to get around it? I believe this is also in the interest of the handlers, whether it's Pakistan, China, or anyone else. Because at the end, if this doesn't happen, this very monster which they may have created will turn around and bite them. I think that's particularly important.
Okay, yeah, valid point, Ambassador Puri, but one thing you'll have to give it to their handlers. They planned it militarily very well, that, they took over the border crossings, they took over the rural areas. Then nobody thought they'll be at the gates of Kabul so far. So militarily, I think, or strategically, whoever planned it for them, if they are themselves not that smart, there is a military mind behind this, and they've done that very, very smartly.
Amritpal, if you will allow me,
please.
I'm not saying that, they were not well advised, etc. I'm not saying it. But, I think we have to understand that this was a superstructure, as I mentioned to you, like the proverbial cookie. And once that little glue, which was the United States of America, announced a date and then finally started running away. The cookie crumbled instantly. So it wasn't their handlers who were very brilliant. These chaps came in motorcycles and entered Kabul. That was not the plan of any of their handlers. That's the way it happened.
So you're saying there was no plan behind the success?
No, I am very convinced that, while after 31st of August, anything may have been done. But I'm very convinced that finally, actually, the glue just disappeared or whatever else that you may say.
Okay.
No scripting or no scripting, not to the last detail. So that's actually managed.
Okay, Ambassador Karju and Rajeshwari, I'll let you come in, but I'll tell you what Hamid Karzai said today. Former President Hamid Karzai on Tuesday informed the residents of Kabul that he'll be along with the head of the High Council for National Reconciliation, Dr. Abdullah Abdullah, and the leader of the Hizb-e-Islami group, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, met with the Taliban leaders. He's confirming that he's met with them. Karzai added that through these meetings they are trying to bring in peace to Afghans. Now, whatever that means, does that mean formation of the government? Let's listen in to Karzai.
Dear citizens of Kabul, we are happy to talk to you again. I am with you. I appeal for unity. We should all stay together. I will stand by you. Dr. Abdullah Abdullah, Chairman of the High Peace Council, and I are trying to bring peace in Kabul and will keep trying.
And as the Taliban is firmly in control of Afghanistan, a blame game has started. Many, including the opposition leaders, are questioning the United States troop withdrawal. President Joe Biden faces stark criticism. U.S. opposition I'm talking about has pounced on the opportunity. Many call the events and Taliban heartbreaking as the world watches from a distance. Republican Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has termed the events unfolding in Afghanistan as a defeat for America. That's what he said. Look at this report.
As thousands of civilians desperate to flee Afghanistan thronged Kabul airport's single runway on Monday after the Taliban seized the capital, President Joe Biden faced mounting criticism over the US withdrawal. Opposition leaders in the US have pointed the guns of criticism at his decision to leave the war-torn nation. Republican Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has termed the events unfolding in Afghanistan as a defeat for America.
I think Afghanistan is lost. Every terrorist around the world is cheering. In Syria, in Yemen, in Africa. They've watched the Taliban, in effect, defeat America, in effect.
Crowds converged on the airport seeking to escape, including some clinging to a US military transport plane as it taxied on the runway.
This was a NATO mission. A NATO mission. And now we see these heartbreaking pictures of people clinging to airplanes as they try to escape from the airport in Kabul. An unmitigated disaster.
On its part, the Pentagon has said that it is clueless as to what exactly transpired at the Kabul airport. The horror of the visuals is now haunting people worldwide and is proving to be a political quagmire for the US president. Suddenly, Joe Biden's first year of the presidency is being defined more and more by these visuals, and the opposition has pounced on the opportunity.
I know for a fact that the president's military leaders argued against this decision. I think the president felt strongly about this, obviously. He overruled his own military leaders to do it, and he owns it.
On his part, Biden and his officials have tried to deflect unrelenting criticism and made it clear that the present government inherited the withdrawal deal drawn by previous President Donald Trump.
When I came into office, I inherited a deal that President Trump negotiated with the Taliban. Under his agreement, U.S. forces would be out of Afghanistan by May 1, 2021, just a little over 3 months after I took office. U.S. forces had already drawn down during the Trump administration from roughly 15,500 American forces to 2,500 troops in country. and the Taliban was at its strongest militarily since 2001. The choice I had to make as your president was either to follow through on that agreement or be prepared to go back to fighting the Taliban in the middle of the spring fighting season.
But what is more surprising is that the speed with which Taliban captured the entire nation that has made the task of defending the decision even more challenging. The speed at which Afghan cities fell in days rather than the months, predicted by the US intelligence, have sparked stinging criticism. World Today Desk, DD India.
And now the United States President Joe Biden is firmly defending his decision to withdraw the troops from Afghanistan. Biden says that the United States was never supposed to work on nation building in Afghanistan. It was the responsibility of the Afghan political leaders who fled the country.
US President Joe Biden has said that he stood squarely behind his decision to withdraw US troops from Afghanistan and rejected broad criticism of the chaotic withdrawal that is posing a crisis for him. Biden said that the mission of the United States was never supposed to be nation building, as he blamed the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan on Afghan political leaders who fled the country and the unwillingness of the Afghan army to fight the militant group.
I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces. That's why we're still there. We were clear-eyed about the risks. We planned for every contingency, but I always promised the American people that I would be straight with you. The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight. If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves.
Biden has faced a barrage of criticism, even from his own diplomats, over his handling of the US exit, pulling out troops and then sending back thousands to help with the evacuation. Thousands of civilians desperate to flee Afghanistan thronged Kabul airport's single runway on Monday after the Taliban seized the capital, prompting the United States to suspend evacuations. Biden said that he took full responsibility for his decision to withdraw, emphasizing his belief was correct and long overdue.
I will not mislead the American people by claiming that just a little more time in Afghanistan will make all the difference. Nor will I shrink from my share of responsibility for where we are today and how we must move forward from here. I am President of the United States of America, and the buck stops with me. I'm deeply saddened by the facts we now face. But I do not regret my decision to end America's war fighting in Afghanistan and maintain a laser focus on our counterterrorism missions there and other parts of the world.
Biden also said that his decision is the result of the commitment he made to American troops that he was not going to ask them to continue to risk their lives for a war that should have ended long back.
I cannot and will not ask our troops to fight on endlessly in another country's civil war, taking casualties, suffering life-shattering injuries, leaving families broken by grief and loss. This is not in our national security interest. Our leaders did that in Vietnam when I got here as a young man. I will not do it in Afghanistan. I know my decision will be criticized, but I would rather take all that criticism than pass this decision on to another president of the United States, yet another one, a fifth one, because it's the right one, it's the right decision for our people.
Biden also coupled his defense with a warning to the Taliban leaders: let the US withdrawal proceed unimpeded or face a devastating force. World Today Desk, DD India.
So it was not my war, it is the Afghans' war. They have to fight it themselves. We were not there for their nation building or fighting a war which they were not ready to fight. We were there to protect our interests. That's what the US President says. Let me go back to my guests. Let me bring in, I have with me Vivek Karju, I have with me Manjeev Singh Puri, and I have with me Rajeshwari Krishnamurthy from the IPCS. Ambassador Karju, to you first. Well, my gentleman and Ms. Krishnamurthy, just a moment, my producer tells me that the Prime Minister is holding a meeting. All right, we'll go back to that later. All right, Ambassador Karju, the US President says, I inherited this war, I'll not pass it on to another US President, I'll take the criticism for it. In any case, we weren't there for nation building of the Afghans. We were fighting for them. If they can't fight for themselves, too bad for them. Their own political leadership fled, and he's putting the blame on them of the criticism being directed at him for not handling the exit well. What do you make of it?
There are two separate issues here. One is handling the exit, and the second is on nation building. Manjeev has far greater experience than I have. He served with great distinction in the UN. So on nation building and multilateral or international efforts at nation building post-conflict, he will be far better, in a far better position.
Okay.
But I'll give you my perspective from what I witnessed in Afghanistan. The first thing is clearly that the Americans went into Afghanistan to respond to 9/11.
Right.
And to clear up the Al-Qaeda.
Yes.
For this purpose, their first attempt, I'm sorry, I'm going into a little history, but it might be some useful for you.
That's fine. Please go ahead.
For this purpose, they first approached the Taliban and told them that, look, we have no problems with you per se. And that's a fact. They never had a problem with the Taliban as a group.
No, you say they approached the Taliban when? In 2001?
In 2001, after 9/11.
After 9/11.
They actually, no, let me, since you want history, I'll tell you, they actually, but if you need, perhaps this might be of some interest.
Yes, sir, please go ahead.
The first time the United Nations, and Manjeev will find this interesting, the first time the United Nations held a meeting on Afghanistan was in November of 1996. Boutros Ghali called that meeting, of countries with interest and influence in Afghanistan, and India was invited too. And I was then a Joint Secretary in the External Affairs Ministry handling Pakistan and Afghanistan. So I went with the secretary concerned and attended this meeting. And at this meeting, the American representative, who was then Robin Raffel, who I think some Indian diplomats know rather well, was the Assistant Secretary of State in the American State Department, and she represented the United States. And she said that the Taliban were an authentic Afghan group, and they represented the traditions, the orthodox traditions of the Afghan South, which means the Pashtun.
Okay.
I'm paraphrasing her words, but they are available on the net. If you Google, you'll find.
So you're saying they reached out, the Americans in 2001 after 9/11 reached out to the Taliban?
No, just hear me out. So the first time the Americans had a problem with
Sir, can I stop you for a moment here? My producer tells me that the Prime Minister is holding a meeting on the situation in Afghanistan. These are live shots. We can see Defense Minister. Okay, this meeting happened a little while back. The Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary briefing the Prime Minister about the situation. We can see the Union Home Minister there. We can see the Defense Minister. Basically, the Finance Minister is also sitting there, and we can see the Foreign Secretary briefing briefing the meeting on the situation in Afghanistan, the unfolding. As we know that India has for the moment recalled its diplomats. The ambassador and the Indian staff has come back. This is the language used by the Ministry of External Affairs, that they've come back. They've not officially said that we've temporarily shut down or we've pulled out. They've said that we've called them back for the moment. The reason being cited is security situation, which of course is one reason, but the other could be perhaps India's deliberating on waiting for who will be next in power and what sort of diplomatic relations to establish with them. In any case, the situation is very bad. Most people are pulling, most embassies or most countries are pulling out the diplomatic staff from there. I think apart from Pakistan, Russia and apart from Pakistan, Russia and China, most countries have pulled out of there. So these meetings are there. I have with me my colleague Ramesh Ramachandran, who's joining me on the phone line. Ramesh, if you could fill in us about what meeting is this where the Foreign Secretary is briefing the Prime Minister and his cabinet ministers that we see. Is it a CCS meeting that the Foreign Secretary is briefing on the situation on Afghanistan?
Indeed, Amrit, as the picture suggests, Prime Minister Modi has chaired a meeting of the Cabinet Committee on Security. Although all ministers who are members of the Cabinet Committee on Security were present, Foreign Minister Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar is traveling. He is in New York. And so we've seen the Foreign Secretary stand in for the MEA and brief the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Committee on what is happening in Afghanistan. And as we've been reporting here on DD India, India has airlifted 100-odd citizens, including its ambassador in Kabul, Rudrendra Tandon, on board a Indian military aircraft which landed in Jamnagar, Gujarat this morning. And since then, they have also reached the capital, New Delhi, the outskirts of the capital. So India has brought back its citizens in the last couple of days. But that said, the MEA says there could be some more Indian nationals still present in Afghanistan who could not be airlifted and evacuated on time because of various other commitments. So the MEA is asking them to get in touch with the relevant authorities in Kabul and in New Delhi. It shared the mobile numbers, the phone numbers and emails as well. In the meantime, Amrit, as we've been reporting here, India has also introduced what is known as the e-emergency visa to fast-track applications by Afghan nationals who might want to leave Afghanistan for India in the coming days. And in the meantime, just to bring our viewers up to speed on what is happening from on the side of the Foreign Minister who is in New York. Yesterday, we are told that Foreign Minister Jaishankar spoke with his American counterpart, Antony Blinken. They discussed about Afghanistan and also how the Kabul airport operations need to resume at the earliest so that not only military aircraft but commercial flights could also land and take off from Kabul. And also, most recently, we've seen a tweet put out by Foreign Minister Jaishankar himself, who says that the movement of the Indian ambassador and the embassy staff from Kabul to India, according to his tweet, was quote-unquote a difficult and complicated exercise, and he goes on to thank all those who cooperated and facilitated and made it possible. He also discussed the Afghanistan situation with his French counterpart and also his Indonesian counterpart.
Right. Ramesh, many thanks for filling us up on this meeting of which we are playing out shots on your television screen. This is the Cabinet Committee on Security Affairs, which includes, it's a select committee of the Cabinet which takes decisions regarding important decisions which have strategic relevance. It's not the full Cabinet does not need to meet. This smaller committee called CCS or the Cabinet Committee on Security takes these decisions. The Home Home Minister, the Defence Minister, the External Affairs Minister, the Finance Minister are a part of that meeting. So these shots that we are playing out happened a little while back. We can clearly see Harsh Shringla, our Foreign Secretary, briefing the meeting, briefing this meeting and the members present in it on the situation in Afghanistan. And let me go back to my guests, Ambassador Vivek Karju, Ambassador Manjeev Puri, and Rajeshwari Krishnamurthy on this. Ambassador Karju, my producer, tells me that you wanted to come in on this meeting. Is that so?
If you permit.
Yes, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
I think it is very opportune, and it's an excellent thing that I'm sure Manjeev will recognize him too, that our ambassador, our very competent ambassador, is also there
yes.
next to Harsh Shringla in this meeting, and the Prime Minister and the members of the committee, which is certainly the highest committee in India on security issues, will have the opportunity to hear, if they so want, the situation as it is on the ground in Kabul and in Afghanistan. So I think that is a very thing. Naturally, the Foreign Secretary briefed. He is the senior most diplomat in India, career diplomat. But the presence of the ambassador is also a good thing, and I'm sure Manjeev would like to add something to this.
Ambassador Puri, would you like to come in, please?
Thank you, Amrit, and Ambassador Karju, thank you. You know, I noticed this fact that I think this meeting was held after the aircraft landed in Hindon, so
Yes.
that our ambassador could be there. And this is a particularly important point, because remember, everything else is through what? The medium of the news. He is the one person who can brief them on what is happening on the ground, at least as far as Kabul is concerned. After all, he also drove from his embassy to the airport, negotiated with the Taliban. So this is particularly important. And I believe, look, this committee meeting signifies another thing. Afghanistan is important for us, strategically important. It is in our neighborhood. This is not just something which is happening anywhere in the world. This is of fundamental security, and it is a matter of great interest to us. And this kind of meeting is reflective of that. The Honorable Prime Minister himself chairing the meeting, and the senior most ministers present getting themselves briefed from the ground situation. Particularly important. I'm happy that you covered it live.
Okay, Ambassador Karju, because as somebody who's served at the higher echelons of the Ministry of External Affairs, give us a sense of what transpires at these meetings. Would they be taking a decision on the road ahead, how to deal with the situation? What's the next step to establish, take a call on what sort of relations we want to establish there? Do they discuss what happens to our investments, huge investments that we've made there now that the regime has changed? And if the Taliban come, at least it's perceived that they wouldn't be very amenable to the Indians or their so-called masters or handlers or whatever you wish to call them. Let me say it out aloud. The Pakistanis would not want a great influence of the Indians in Kabul, as was with the previous regime. So is that all discussed threadbare in this meeting, in such meetings?
Yes, indeed it is. I think the very fact that, as Manjeev has very correctly pointed out, that this meeting has been held only after Rudrendra Tandon, the ambassador, has arrived. And quite clearly, while the Foreign Secretary, as I said, would brief, because he is
traveling to New
York. But if there are any questions, just hear me out. If there are any questions that the Prime Minister may have, or the cabinet, or the other members, the senior members of the committee, or what is happening on the ground, then Tandon will be able to brief them. But this meeting, such meetings are there to discuss our security aspects fully and very candidly. And quite clearly you can see from the Prime Minister that he is attentively hearing to all aspects, and he is mindful clearly of the stakes that we have in our western neighborhood and the implications of what has happened. So So it's a very timely meeting. It's going to assess the situation, and thereafter, I'm sure decisions will flow. Now, it's not that decisions may be taken at the meeting itself, because decisions require due deliberation. But certainly, the senior most ministers involved in security are apprised of the situation, and so is the Prime Minister. So it's good.
Okay. Ambassador Katju, before I go to Ambassador Puri and Rajeshwari, what is your assessment of what should be the way forward now from here on where we stand today?
Look, I think that this is a very dangerous time for us in our Western neighborhood. I feel that China will make a play for Afghanistan without wanting to commit the mistakes that the Soviets and the Americans made. I've argued that Pakistan is already a client state. The Chinese are making a big play in Iran. The Central Asian states, in the Central Asian states, they are economically entrenched. Of course, the Russians are there, and the Americans and the Turks are making for it, but the Chinese are there. The missing link for them is Afghanistan. Now, if we do not seek to reach out to the Taliban, much as we dislike the ideology, much as we find it antithetical to the Indian state, and I'm mindful of the concerns of people like Rajeshwari. But if we don't, then I think we jeopardize our geopolitical interests in this entire region, and therefore, I for one believe that we've got to do business with the new dispensation that comes into Kabul. Because we can't allow China and Pakistan a free run in Afghanistan. Okay. I've argued for a long time that we should have opened up with the Taliban many years ago, but the government, I'm sure, has access to information, assessments, etc., which leads it to make its decisions. I don't contest that. But today, certainly, we can't be inhibited in reaching out to the Taliban, because otherwise, and permit me this, I've written an article which has been carried in one of the national papers today, in the electronic edition. Tomorrow I'm told it will be in the printed, where I've said that to me the most significant visual which has come out over the last few days has not been of the Taliban in Afghanistan, in Kabul. It is of the leaders of the erstwhile Northern Alliance being welcomed by Qureshi, the Pakistan Foreign Minister, and the Pakistan Foreign Office.
Right.
Who were they? There were people who felt that Afghanistan's interests were aligned with us. Kanuni, Mohaqqiq, Khalili, the two brothers, Ahmad Zia Masood, Ahmad Wali Masood, the brothers of the late Ahmad Shah Masood.
Yes.
And Khalili and Ahmad Zia Masood have both remained vice presidents of Afghanistan. And there was Salahuddin Rabbani, the son of President Burhanuddin Rabbani, and a former foreign minister. So the fact that they didn't come here but they went to Pakistan shows what? Shows to me the stakes that they are for us in Afghanistan. And let us face it, as a country we must be ruthlessly realistic. The kind of position that Pakistan is in today. So I'm sure this meeting which the Prime Minister is conducting will appreciate the stakes that we have in Afghanistan and the entire region, and the kind of decisions, perhaps hard decisions, that we have to come to. Geopolitical consideration and security considerations often demand very hard decisions, and this Prime Minister, experience shows, does not shirk from them. So I'm sure that in this meeting and later on, he will focus on it.
Okay. Okay.
Manjeev has great experience of these issues, so please.
Yeah, Ambassador Puri, whoever comes in power in a foreign capital, we don't decide that. If it is a friendly government, good for us. If it's not, you have to deal with whoever comes. It's their country by the end of it. So what should be our approach forward in terms of reaching out to the Taliban? And secondly, what would be our bandwidth given they come from where they come from?
Amrit, thank you very much. And of course, it's been spelled out in great detail by Ambassador Kartu. Let me say this, that, you can choose who your predecessors and so on and so forth, many things. But this business of dealing with other countries and governments, especially those in your region, as you very rightly put it, you have to deal with them. Put sentimentality aside, although you can't forget it. I don't think we in our domestic politics and in terms of our internalization can forget the Taliban and our experiences. And so therefore to say that, we can straight away enter inside the tent and do what the Chinese are doing is perhaps a little difficult domestically. We need to understand that. But governments have to find ways of dealing with other governments, especially when they are strategically and security-wise critical, and this is really one of the cases. So a line to the Taliban, very necessary. As far as the Chinese are concerned, I think it's easy to say that they would try to do things which the others couldn't do. Well, let's see if that can happen. Not so easy. But for us, we must be mindful of the map. Please look at the map and just go beyond Jammu and Kashmir. What do you see? That China actually is able to reach up to Iran and then in towards the Middle East, the Arabian Sea, etc. And this is something we should be particularly mindful of, that, these kind of strategic access, etc. gets made. And we, therefore, are the country which gets, in a sense, we are right there. We need to understand, we need to take these steps forward. For me, I think we need to do one thing very, very importantly. Whether we like it or not, Iran and Russia are important players in this game. We need to go back to building, let me put it like this, far more strategic and more beneficial relationships with them, more willing to act with them, because we do have an outstanding relationship with the United States. But this, when seen by the others, is something that we need to be ourselves mindful of. How we play what the foreign minister calls not just non-alignment, but multi-alignment. That's something which the government should do. But I remain very firmly convinced that this is an area, this is a time when you need to do, I don't want to use the old-fashioned word non-alignment, but multi-alignment, and you need to do it, because being seen as just being with one is, I don't think, particularly useful and necessarily advantageous to us also from a security perspective.
Yeah, you make a very valid point from a larger perspective.
May I add a point there, if you permit?
Yes, Ambassador Karju, please.
I think what Manjeev says is entirely valid. I mean, we've got to look at this region holistically, see how people are doing, and I see his point entirely, that the Chinese may want something but not do it. But the very fact that that we anticipate they'll make a play is good enough for us. Not to allow them complete space, and the Pakistanis with them.
Okay.
As far as the Taliban are concerned, I will only add that in the 1990s, and there is a fact of history, in the 1990s, and I know it for a personal fact because I was dealing with this issue. In the 1990s, the interests of India, Iran, and Russia were aligned in opposing the Taliban in Afghanistan.
Okay.
Also, at that stage, the world, the international community had not recognized the Taliban at all. The UN seat was still held by President Burhanuddin Rabbani's government. Only 3 countries recognized the Taliban: the Pakistanis, the Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. No one else did. So we were on very firm footing when we said we will not recognize the Taliban. Our business will be conducted by the erstwhile the government, which only controlled 5 to 7% of Afghanistan's territory, but the world also recognized it. Then the times changed, and the Russians and the Iranians who were with us in opposing them recognized the Taliban, recognized, quote unquote, started doing business with them, they legitimized them. So I think today, when we think of multipolarity, etc., we need also to look at what other countries are doing, how they are approaching.
Absolutely.
We can't, be in a corner. We've got to reach out. That's the way the diplomatic game is played.
And also
even with groups, my last point, even with groups we don't like, even with groups we condemn, even with groups from whom we need justice. I was on the tarmac in Kandahar.
Right.
At the time of IC-814 hijack.
Yes.
I will never forget those days.
I understand.
Second, I will never forget that an Indian boy coming back from his honeymoon from Kathmandu was on that plane and he was killed. And the hijack was conducted by Pakistani terrorists.
Right.
But geopolitical factors demand that emotion doesn't govern us.
Okay.
It is cold reason and the cold logic of interest.
Absolutely. Cold logic of interest, and we have to deal with them. Well, that's all the time we have for Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, Ambassador Vivek Karju, Rajeshwari, Krishnamurthy. I apologize to you. I gave you less time because this meeting came in. The next time on, we can chat more. All three, both gentlemen and the lady, thank you for being on the show. And before we leave, let's take a look at the Independence Day celebrations in Moscow, celebrating 75th Independence Day. Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav included lighting of revolution, tar and flash, mob cultural programs and fireworks. That on your screens. Enjoy that enchanting visual. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.